and they used a device called an airlift, which acts as a giant underwater vacuum cleaner that's used to suck up all the sand that hides the history beneath. Now, for weeks, the team scanned the bottom. They watched the monitors looking for straight lines in a world of curves. They were looking for anything that appeared man-made. And on July 4th of 1988, they got their break. It was a day of extreme low tide, which meant the water level was lower than usual, bringing the seabed closer to the surface. A diver archaeologist named Mr. Rajun and a photographer named Sirsath geared up, and they put on their tanks and their masks. They rolled backwards off the side of the boat and splashed into the water. And they descended through the gloom, fighting the current that tried to push them away. And as they reached the bottom, the silt swirled around them, but through the haze, they could see something. It wasn't a rock formation, nor was it a coral reef. It was a structure. Rao designated this discovery BDK-8. It was a massive rubble wall. It was encrusted with barnacles and sea life, but underneath the growth, the geometry was undeniable. These were stone blocks, they were heavy, they were dressed and shaped by human hands and stacked on top of each other. The divers swam along the length of the wall, and they realized this wasn't a small foundation. It was actually a massive stone protection wall, or perhaps a pier. They found features that looked like bastions, fortified projections used for defense. They found rock-cut channels that looked like they were designed to manage water or guide boats, and scattered all around these structures were stone anchors. And not just one, but dozens of them, triangular and grapnel-shaped anchors that suggested this had once been a bustling port. So when the divers surfaced and reported what they had found, Rao was ecstatic. He looked at the data and he looked at the layout of the walls and the bastions. And in his mind, everything was snapping together. This wasn't a random pile of rocks. He believed he was looking at the fortifications of a Bronze Age metropolis, that this was a specific city described in the Mahabharata. The text spoke of a city with gateways and fortifications, and here, under 20 feet of water, were gateways and fortifications. The team did use airlifts to clear more sand, and they found pottery shards embedded in the settlement, specifically a pottery known as lustrous redware. Now, this was critical because this specific type of pottery, this dates back to the late Harappan period, which puts it at roughly 15th century BC. Now, to Rao, this was the final nail in the coffin. He had the walls, he had the location, and now at the pottery, he had the date, 3,500 years ago. So he published his findings, and the world took notice. Headlines screamed that the lost city of Krishna had been found. It was a moment of triumph for Indian archaeology, and it seemed like the mystery was finally solved. The ocean had taken the city just like the legend said, and now science had brought it back. But as it turns out, the ocean hadn't given up all of its secrets yet, because years later, another team would go down and they would find a single stone block that would threaten to tear his entire theory apart. In the year 2000, a new report surfaced that completely shocked the entire archaeological community, and it was titled Recent Underwater Explorations at Dwarka, and it was published by the National Institute of Oceanography. The lead author was a marine archaeologist named A.S. Gore. Now, Gore and his team had gone back to the site. They weren't there to disprove Rao, they were there to document the site with even more precision. And they conducted 173 dives. They spent over 120 hours underwater, battling the same violent currents. They measured the walls down to the centimeter. They mapped the coordinates of every scattered stone block. And during one of those dives, they found something that Rao's team had missed. It was a single stone block, but much like the others, this one had markings. And it wasn't erosion or barnacles, it was actual writing. So they cleaned it up, they analyzed the inscription, because if this city was truly from the time of Lord Krishna, 3,500 years ago, the writing should have been an ancient script, perhaps something related to the Indus Valley civilization, but it wasn't. The report identified the writing as Gujarati script, and that was a massive problem. Now, Gujarati script didn't exist 3,500 years ago. It is a relatively modern script, but the evidence suggested that the stone block and likely the wall it was attached to didn't date back to the Bronze Age. It dated back to the late medieval period, maybe the 13th or 14th century AD. And so suddenly, the fortifications of an ancient city looked a lot more like the remains of a medieval harbor jetty. It looked like a place where merchant ships would dock hundreds of years ago, not thousands. Well, skeptics jumped on this. And so they argued that the entire site was just a shipwreck or a broken pier from the Middle Ages, and that the lost city was nothing more than a pile of rocks and wishful thinking. But that wasn't the whole story, because while the walls might have been medieval, the dirt under them was still telling a different story entirely. Now, remember that lustrous red ware pottery Ralph found? That was still there, and you can't fake pottery dating. That pottery really was from 1500 BC. So the picture that emerged wasn't of a single city that sank on one dramatic day. It was something much more complex, and in a way, much more haunting. You see, this means that the site of Dwarka is a graveyard of cities. Just like the excavations on land showed, people would build a settlement, the ocean would rise and destroy it. And so centuries later, new people come along and build a harbor on top of ruins. The ocean would destroy that too. The stone block with the script proved the upper layers were new, but the pottery proved that the foundation was ancient. The sea level in this area has risen and fallen repeatedly over the last millennia. The seventh day prophecy might not be about a single week in history. It might be a warning about the inevitable power of the ocean in this corner of the world.